Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're in session number 5 of our new series entitled Update on the QME Regulations. And I should remind you before we get started here today that this discussion involves new proposed changes to the QME regulations. These proposed changes are not yet fully enacted into law, but I anticipate that except for some minor massage of some of the language of some of these specified proposed changes, except for that, I fully expect all of these changes, at least in spirit, in the spirit with which the language is written, I expect them to be enacted in spirit very, very shortly, perhaps as early as the beginning of 2022. And the reason that I expect all of these proposed changes to be approved and enacted into active law is because all of the proposed changes represent good changes. They're all good changes. Now, some parties might disagree with me, but I can't see through my reading of these proposed changes over and over and over again. I can't see where there's anything bad, anything wrong, anything detrimental, anything deleterious to the system as a whole. If these changes were to be adopted. They all represent, in my opinion, good changes. And the reason they represent good changes is because the purpose of these new proposed QME regulations is to improve the system. And I've reviewed each of them, and we're going over each of them in this series, and each of them results in an improvement in the series, in the system as we know it, if you see it that way. And in session number 1, I extracted from the new proposed changes in the QME regulations some of the most important select changes that are going to impact you and your day-to-day operations as a qualified medical evaluator. So in session number 1, we had an overview, a brief discussion of each of the most important of the new proposed changes. In session 2, we talked about what the new proposed changes have to do and how the new proposed changes can impact the scheduling of each of your QME appointments that come to you, beginning with the phone call where either the applicant attorney or the defense attorney or the claims administrator request a scheduled day, date, and time with you for a QME appointment. And I shared with you several strategies as to how you can ensure that when you schedule an appointment for a QME appointment, that the likelihood is very, very good that that appointment is going to be an appointment, number 1, that's going to stick, number 2, an appointment that's going to be compensable, and number 3, an appointment for which you can expect to be paid timely. In other words, it's a high quality appointment. The philosophy of that discussion was how to schedule high quality appointments and how to let low quality appointments go by unscheduled. There's no purpose in scheduling low quality appointments. And I can tell you that I get calls every day from qualified medical evaluators who lament to me that they're not getting paid for evaluations that they fully completed. In other words, they've gone through all of the cycles in completing an evaluation. They've done a face-to-face meeting with the examinee, they've completed their report, they've submitted their report, and they're not getting paid because they set up a low-quality appointment in the beginning. And we can trace low-quality appointments backwards, and I'll ask these qualified medical evaluators, well, did you get a cover letter? And the qualified medical evaluator will admit to me, well, no, I didn't get a cover letter. They didn't send me one. They didn't send me one, as if it's the responsibility of the other party to ensure that you as the qualified medical evaluator get a cover letter. And then it just deteriorates from that, and I'll say, well, so you didn't get a cover letter. Did you get copies of the strike letters that left you last man standing? And they'll say, no. And I'll say, did you get a written confirmation of the appointment from any of the parties? No. Did you get a copy of QME Form 106, the QME panel request? No. And the qualified medical evaluators And I've done this myself, and I'm just telling you this because I learned this the hard way. And I'm the slowest learner in the world, and I'm trying to help you not have to suffer these losses. And so the philosophy is we only schedule those appointments that are high quality appointments. Now, with that said, we can only do so much. So you have to understand and you have to become comfortable with the fact that approximately only about 65%, 65 to 70%, this is in my experience, of scheduled appointments, of scheduled high quality appointments, actually keep. Not all of them are going to keep. So you can go through all of the steps that I suggested and schedule what you would consider to be a high quality appointment, only 4 weeks later to get a phone call that the appointment is being canceled because of fill in the blank. And you can fill in the blank. The case has settled, okay? Or the party will tell you, we decided to go with an AME. Or the party will tell you, well, it seems that the other party is having an objection to the specialty of the panel, okay? And there's all these reasons down the line that your appointment could cancel, all of which we have no control over. So the factors that we do have control over are at the inception of the appointment scheduling process, and I shared with you how to schedule high quality appointments in our second session. In our third and fourth sessions, we talked about a biggie, and this is a biggie. In the new QME regulations, this is the first time ever in the history of the QME regulations that the Division of Workers' Compensation has introduced anti-bias training and anti-bias regulations. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time reviewing that here, but suffice to say that I consider this to be a big deal, because all of our biases and all of our stereotypes and all of our preconceived notions that we have in evaluating injured workers, all of those have the net effect, have the ultimate end effect of reducing benefits for the injured worker. None of our biases result in increased, excessive, exaggerated benefits for injured workers. They all result in a reduction, either in permanent impairment ratings and or apportionment determinations that negatively impact the injured worker. And so this anti-bias training that the Division of Workers' Compensation intends to put us through throughout our life cycle as a qualified medical evaluator is going to have a dramatic effect upon the benefits that are provided to injured workers. And we're going to have a lot more to say about this in the future, and I'm going to do a complete 6-hour program on bias in the medical legal evaluation. Okay, so that brings us to today's session number 5, and today I want to talk to you about what the new proposed changes to the QME regulations have to say about our face-to-face evaluation with examinees and about our preparation and submission of our end product QME reports. Now, to establish a little bit of philosophy and history regarding today's discussion, I want to take your attention back about 12 to 18 months ago, when the Division of Workers' Compensation was under sharp fire from the state auditor, who conducted an audit of the Division of Workers' Compensation in around November 2019. Well, the state auditor, as she's famous for doing to various governmental agencies and other agencies that invoke her assistance, she found many problems in the Division of Workers' Compensation's management and administration of the Qualified Medical Evaluators program. And specifically, the state auditor found that the Division of Workers' Compensation was not taking responsibility to ensure that qualified medical evaluators consistently provide what were referred to as high-quality reports. In other words, the state auditor determined that the reports that qualified medical evaluators author are low quality reports that are not capable of resolving disputed issues, and therefore these reports have the net impact on the system of introducing delays in the resolution of cases and introducing increased costs for each case. It just drives up the costs of the case. Well, the Division of Workers' Compensation then became required to address this issue. And in addressing the content and quality of QME reports, the Division of Workers' Compensation has begun to administer a series of steps that have as their purpose to improve the quality of QME reports. And we're going to see some of those steps manifesting themselves in these new proposed changes to the QME regulations. So those are what we will discuss today. So let's begin today's discussion. We're in session number 5 of our new series on the update of the QME regulations. And today we're talking about the evaluation and reporting guidelines. Okay, so let's begin. So we're talking about the evaluation and reporting guidelines described in new proposed changes found in CCR 35.5. And 35.5 begins with Section A to remind us that each evaluation, examination, and report completed pursuant to all of these labor codes, these ones that I've highlighted here in yellow. These are the labor codes that refer to the QME panel process as we typically encounter it. Okay, Labor Code 4060, 4061, 62.1, and 62.2. These are the QME panel labor codes that govern the QME panel process. And there's a couple other labor codes that bring evaluations to us, but these are not the typical ones that we are as familiar with. But it tells us that each evaluation, examination, and report shall be performed in compliance with all appropriate procedures pursuant to this chapter. So it's important for you to realize that this refers to your initial comprehensive medical legal evaluation. It refers to your follow-up medical legal evaluation. It refers to your supplemental medical legal evaluation. It refers to each of the evaluations that we perform under the new medical legal fee schedule, including the ML201, ML202, and the ML203. Now, this is important for you to know that these procedures that are described in this section, and we're going to talk about some of them, applies to each type of report. You know, I used to be under the false understanding that different types of reports had different types of reporting requirements. For example, I used to not know that a proof of service was required to accompany a supplemental report. You might go, oh, duh, that makes sense, and it's written into regulation, but I wasn't aware of that. Now, I would put a proof of service and attach a proof of service to my initial report, but typically for a supplemental report, especially if the supplemental report involved only responding to 1 or 2 questions from one or the other of the parties, I would not attach a proof of service. But I then learned that a proof of service was required to be attached to all types of reporting. And that's just an example that the procedures that we're going to discuss in today's discussion apply to all of the different types of evaluations and all of the different types of reports that you submit. Okay? Okay, so each of these procedures apply to each of the different types of reports that you will author. Okay? So with regards to each of those types of reports, Regulation B tells us each reporting evaluator shall state in the body of the report the date the examination was completed and the street address at which the examination was performed. Now, this is important. The street address, as far as the Division of Workers' Compensation, is very, very, very important. Now, with only a couple of exceptions, the Division of Workers' Compensation wants to see the examination performed at the street address that's found on the panel. So when your panel lists 123 Main Street Anytown, USA, and that's the address under your name on the panel that was received by the parties, the Division of Workers' Compensation expects that you will complete that evaluation at 123 Main Street, Anytown, USA. Okay, now exceptions to that are acceptable to the Division of Workers' Compensation, especially as refers to follow-up reevaluations. Now, follow-up reevaluations, you still need to state the street address at which the examination was performed in your follow-up medical legal evaluation report. And in that report, you can explain why the location was changed from the initial evaluation location to a new, different location, different from the address that's found on the panel. The division allows us to do this for follow-up face-to-face evaluation. So that's one exception where the Division of Workers' Compensation will allow the examination to be performed at a location other than the location found on the panel. The second exception is a temporary exception that we're under now due to the COVID emergency regulations. The COVID emergency regulations allow the qualified medical evaluator to move the initial appointment, which otherwise is usually written in stone. The initial appointment has to be completed at the address that's found on the panel, but the COVID emergency regulations allow us to move that appointment to a location that's safer for all the parties, especially safer for the examinee, but still that needs to be explained in writing within the body of the report, because absent a reasonable explanation, the Division of Workers' Compensation expects that the examination will be performed at the location on the panel, and the Division of Workers' Compensation checks for this. They check for this and they issue discipline to doctors who are routinely moving appointments around for the convenience of the doctor. And this is something that the Division of Workers' Compensation is very, very sensitive to. So sensitive that they wrote it into regulation. Okay, so it's required. Next, it says if the evaluator signs the report on any date other than the date the examination was completed, and typically you'll sign the report on the day that the report was completed and mailed, right? Which could be, 29 or even 44 days after the face-to-face evaluation. It says the evaluator shall enter the date the report is signed next to or near the signature on the report. So here are 3 changes that you should make to your QME report templates right away. Number 1, in the introductory section of your report, put an introductory statement that tells the reader of the report the date that the examination was completed and the street address at which the examination was completed. Okay, so there's 2 changes you can add to your template that will help you comply with this regulation. And then number 3 is at the end of your report where you sign the report, go ahead right now and put next to the signature line in your report, here's a signature line in your report, put a space next to it where it says date, and then underlining, and then you can fill in the date on top of the underlining, and you will have complied with all 3 of the requirements of this particular regulation. Okay, next, and this is important, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. Section C1 tells us where we should focus our attention in the production of our final end product report. This is important, and this may introduce some changes in your normal operating procedures moving forward. So let's go over this very, very carefully. This regulation tells us that the evaluator shall address all contested medical issues arising from all injuries that are reported on one or more claim forms, and that reporting is done prior to the date of the employee's appointment with the qualified medical evaluator. And we are to address all injuries that are within our scope of practice and areas of clinical competence. So let's just talk about this for a moment. Now, we as qualified medical evaluators typically don't in every single case, we don't have access to the claim forms that are filled out prior to the appointment with us. Many times we just don't get these in the medical records that we receive. So many times, how can the qualified medical evaluator know what are all the contested medical issues? How can the qualified medical evaluator know what are all of the injuries? In other words, we rely on the parties' best case scenario to provide us with the claim form. Next best case scenario is to indicate to us in their cover letters what are the contested medical issues and what are the body parts and what are the injuries that we are to address. Okay, so this here, the first section of this regulation, describes our obligation, but it's my experience and it's my opinion, and it's my suggestion, that to the parties, that the parties provide us the direction that the evaluation needs to take, okay? And that comes to us in the form of cover letters. And the next section of this regulation addresses the cover letters. And it tells us that the reporting evaluator shall attempt to address each question raised by each party, okay, in the issue cover letter sent to the evaluator as provided in another earlier section, which talks about proper service of the cover letters on the qualified medical evaluator. So this is fascinating. It tells us that each party can submit to us several questions. Now, in Southern California, more than in Northern California, most times the parties get together and they issue a joint cover letter. And the joint cover letter contains within it several questions that the parties have agreed upon to submit to us as the qualified medical evaluator. So there may be as many as 6, 8, 10, 15 questions. I'm making this up, but there's a reasonable range. I've seen them everywhere in between. Well, more in Northern California than Southern California, each party submits a cover letter to the qualified medical evaluator. So you can see that the questions that require our addressment can double, can quickly escalate to a large number of questions. Now, the regulation tells us that we're to address those questions. And I can tell you that in attempting, in the Division of Workers' Compensation's huge project in attempting to improve the quality of QME reports, step number one in improving the quality of QME reports is to get QMEs to write their reports to benefit other people. The purpose of QME reports is to help other people resolve the issues. The purpose of QME reports is not to benefit the QME. The QME is not the reader of the QME report. The readers of the QME reports are people who rely on the report to resolve disputed issues. So the report should be written for the people, for the reader. And this is how you construct your report to benefit the reader of the report. The purpose of the qualified medical evaluation for which you are called in as the qualified medical evaluator is for you to answer some questions that the parties have. And the questions that the parties have are contained in their cover letters. Fascinating concept, huh? And I want to tell you a story. So after the state auditor did her audit and found the Division of Workers' Compensation to be deficient in ensuring that qualified medical evaluators produce high-quality reports, the Division of Workers' Compensation ramped up and they created what is called a Report Quality Committee. The purpose of the Report Quality Committee is to get together and discuss reports, to review reports and find deficiencies in reports, and to identify even good reports, and to find out what's good and find out what's bad, and come up with a consensus as to what constitutes a high quality report, and then begin to move the profession in the direction of the high quality report. So they had these committees, and I was on 2 cycles of report quality committees, 2 cycles of 10 people each. And so what we would do is we would review 10 reports, 10 people in one committee would review 10 reports, and we would score the reports on some established criteria. And then we would get together as a group and we would discuss our findings and discuss the reports and talk about what was good and talk about what was bad. Well, on one particular report, I rated the report a 1 out of a 0 to 10 point scale, with 0 being an absolute deplorable, terrible report, and 10 being a magnificent, perfect report. I rated this particular report a 1, a terrible report. Well, fascinatingly, other members of the report quality committee rated the report much, much higher, much, much higher. And I was the only singular QME on the committee. The other committee members were applicant attorneys, defense attorneys, insurance claims administrators, administrators in the workers' compensation system, etc. They rated the report much, much higher. Well, in discussing this report, the parties came to me and they said, Perry, so why did you rate this report so low? And I said, well, because I'm looking at the exam, and because I am a doctor, and because I know the AMA guides, I can tell you that this report, this examination in this report, does not comply with the AMA guides, and in my opinion, the examination was terrible. And I told them such. Well, the discussion then moved on around the table, and the other parties explained that they considered the report to be a very, very good report because in the report, the evaluator addressed the questions. And the principle is that the examination that we focus so much of our time, energy, and attention on does not serve the parties. The parties rely on the conclusion of our examination, but they don't rely on the minutia of the findings of our conclusion. We do. We become fascinated with that because we're doctors, but I'm telling you that the examination section of your report is not relevant, except to the extent that you use it in addressing the questions that are raised by the parties in the cover letters. So what I'm suggesting to you, and this is as a result of going through 2 cycles of report quality committees and meeting with people who read our reports, I'm suggesting to you that you de-emphasize the examination reporting. I'm not saying de-emphasize your examination, I'm saying de-emphasize your examination reporting. And take that time that you would otherwise consume in describing all the minutia of your exam findings and devote that time to the discussion section of the report where you address each question. So in every single report that you submit, you should have a section in the report where each of the questions that the parties submit to you are answered, and you answer them specifically in the language with which the question is asked. You write the question, you answer the question. If it's a yes or no question, you answer with yes or no. If it's a question that asks for you to elaborate on your facts, you elaborate on your facts. You answer the questions in the way and with the language that the question is asked. And this alone will immeasurably improve the usability and the quality of QME reports. So this is a big one, and I'm asking you to restructure your reporting to accommodate this particular regulation. Okay, next, and this is just some administrative stuff, but again, the purpose of these regulations is to improve the system by beginning by improving the qualified medical evaluator's reporting. So section C, subsection 2 tells us that if you, as the qualified medical evaluator, declare the injured worker permanent and stationary for the body part or parts that you evaluated, and if you find that the injury has caused permanent partial disability, okay, so this form does not need to be completed in the absence of a permanent and stationary declaration. It does not need to be completed if the examinee does not have permanent partial disability, but in the context of both of those, The evaluator shall complete the DWC-AD form 101, etc., and serve it on the claims administrator together with the medical report. Now, I've noted that recently, in the last 6 months, certainly, every single cover letter comes to me with a copy of this form. It comes with the form because this is a form that the claims administrator really, and all the parties really want us to fill out. So they're including it with their cover letter. Now, for us as qualified medical evaluators, this simply represents another form and another piece of paper that has to be completed before the report can finally be stamped and put in the mail. And it's, it's a pain in the rear end, but it is required. And I'm suggesting to you that you can fill this report out in just a very few minutes. And your staff can complete the demographic sections of this report, because the claims administrators never send it to you with the demographic information already completed. But you can have your staff do that, and you can complete this form in just a very few minutes. And it's required, so don't blow off that form. I know qualified medical evaluators that simply crumple it up and throw it away, but it is a required form. Next. And this has to do with issues and injuries outside of your scope of practice. It says that at the evaluator's earliest opportunity, and certainly no later than the date the report is served. So in other words, if you know this before you even service the report, you should handle this even before your report is done. It says the evaluator shall advise the parties in writing of any disputed medical issue that's outside of the evaluator's scope of practice and area of clinical competency. Why? Why should you notify us at the earliest opportunity? Well, the reason is so that the parties may initiate the process for obtaining an additional evaluation under the QME panel process under these two labor codes, which we know takes time. So that's why they're asking us to do this at our earliest opportunity, so that the delay between evaluations can be minimized. It says in the case of an AME or a panel QME, the evaluator shall send a copy of the written notification provided to the parties also to the medical director at the same time. And when the medical director gets a copy of the panel, in addition to a party's request for an additional panel, then the medical director can act upon it and issue a new panel in another specialty to resolve disputed issues in the claim. Okay, so here you should create a quick template in Microsoft Word wherein you can quickly explain to the parties that another specialty is required, and you can have a brief section or a bullet point wherein you elaborate very briefly what is the issue and why that's outside of your scope of practice, and therefore the parties can keep this process moving forward and bring this case to a resolution as soon as possible. And that's the purpose of this regulation, like many of the others, is to eliminate delays and reduce overall costs of the claim. Okay, now this next regulation deals with depositions, and I get calls from qualified medical evaluators all the time who want to know some of the rules relating to depositions. Well, those are to be found here in section F. It says that the qualified medical evaluator, upon receiving a request for a QME appointment, shall make him or herself available for deposition within 120 days of the notice of deposition. Now, 120 days. Can you believe that if you write a report that's adverse to one or the other of the parties, and they want to have you removed as the qualified medical evaluator, one of the ways that you can be removed as the evaluator is to be unavailable within 120 days. If you're not available within 120 days, that party can get a new evaluator, okay? So if you want to retain jurisdiction and control over the case, always make yourself available in less than 120 days. Next section says, and upon the request of the unrepresented injured worker, okay, and whenever consistent with Labor Code Section 5710, the deposition shall be held at the location at which the evaluation examination was performed, or at a facility or office chosen by the deposing party that is not more than 20 miles from the location of the evaluation examination. Now, I have found in my experience that this regulation is a soft regulation in that many times the parties are willing to accommodate the qualified medical evaluator at the deposition location. So the qualified medical evaluator may have done the examination at a location, say 100 miles from the qualified medical evaluator's main office or the qualified medical evaluator's home, and the parties will agree to come to the qualified medical evaluator's local city to depose the qualified medical evaluator, but according to this regulation, they don't have to. If they want to strong-arm you as the qualified medical evaluator, they can name a location within 20 miles from the location of the evaluation examination. And this can prove to be quite inconvenient for you as the qualified medical evaluator, and perhaps that may be the design of the parties. But this is an inconvenience that you will be required to comply with by regulation. So always be prepared to have to travel to the examination location or to a facility chosen by the deposing party, at least close to the examination location. You can try to negotiate for a different deposition location, but if the parties want to strong arm you, especially in the context of an unfavorable report, one or more of the parties may request that you travel in order to make you feel some pain for the opinions or conclusions that you offered in your report. Now, next are two regulations that deal with our discussions of further and or future medical care, and in my opinion, this represents good news for our QME reports. So Section G1 says that where the evaluation is performed for injuries that occurred before 1/1/2013, okay, so now that's 8 years ago. How often are we getting evaluation reports for injuries 8 years ago? We get those, but not that much. So this is a diminishing applicability, a regulation with diminishing applicability. But for those dates of injury before 1/1/13, where there's a dispute over a UR decision, and that dispute is relayed to the requesting physician before June 30, 2013. So this is a very narrow window, a 6-month window that this provision, this regulation applies to. So what I'm saying to you is this: we don't have to concern ourselves much with this, but I'm introducing this as good news, and also to introduce the next regulation which will apply to us. It says whenever an agreed medical evaluator or qualified medical evaluator provides an opinion in a report on a disputed medical treatment issue, which after 2013, after June 30, 2013, QMEs do not report on medical treatment disputes. Senate Bill 863 took that issue out of the purview of QMEs and put that into independent medical review, correct? Okay? The evaluator's opinion shall be consistent and apply with the medical treatment utilization schedule or other evidence-based medical treatment guidelines. So what I'm saying is that for a very select number of cases, only a very select number of cases that fit within these narrow windows, we do need to comment on medical treatment disputes, and when we do, our comments need to be consistent with the medical treatment utilization schedule. But that's a very, very exceptional rarity. Typically, we won't have to comment in much great detail on medical treatment that's required by our particular examinee. So then, what are the requirements for us in describing the examinee's need for medical treatment? Well, that's in the next section of this same regulation. So the next section of this same regulation tells us, for any evaluation performed after 1/1/13, after the effective date of Senate Bill 863, which took medical treatment disputes out of the purview of the qualified medical evaluator, it says, and regardless of the date of injury, the AME or the QME shall not provide an opinion on any disputed medical treatment issue. Now, in my opinion, this is good news. This is good news. Deserves a few exclamation marks because it reduces our medical decision making. It reduces the amount of time that we need to spend on this particular section of the report. So it's good news. Medical treatment disputes are now handled by IMR. And even though this results in less work for us as qualified medical evaluators, it also results in less work in each and every report that we author. But the regulation tells us that the QME shall provide an opinion about whether the injured worker will need future medical care to cure or relieve the effects of an industrial injury. Now, this is the regulation. Now, to my reading of the regulation, it says that we must provide an opinion about the future medical care needs of the injured worker. That tells me that our discussion in this section can be very, very brief. We can simply state in this section of the report, in my opinion, Mr. Jones will require care in the future to cure and or relieve from the effects of the industrial injury, period. And then a very, very brief discussion as to what Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith may need in terms of future medical care. The discussion need not be consistent with medical treatment utilization schedule. It need not be consistent with evidence-based guidelines. It need not even be specific as to the types of treatment. You may simply opine that Mr. Smith, during periods of flare-up or aggravation of his symptoms which do not respond to home treatment efforts, should be provided for physician follow-up visits with the primary care physician, for medical management and or specialist referral as may be necessary, period. And that's the whole future medical care discussion section of your report. So don't spend any time in your report discussing ACOM guidelines, evidence-based treatment guidelines, or anything else that relates to medical treatment, because that's now outside the scope of our clinical competence and our clinical responsibilities as qualified medical evaluators. Okay, and finally, in the interest of producing higher quality reports and in the interest of ramping up across the industry, across 3,500 qualified medical evaluators, the Division of Workers' Compensation is proposing in their new proposed changes to the QME regulations that every report, every initial report, supplemental report, every follow-up reevaluation report include the following attestation by the qualified medical evaluator. And that is that you, John J. Smith, MD, QME, declare under penalty of perjury that I did not discriminate in any way against the parties to the action or against the injured worker in the evaluation process or in the content of the report. Now, at the time of this recording, discussions about discrimination and bias and stereotyping in the medical legal process as a subset of the larger workers' compensation system, discussions and awareness of bias are in their initial principal stages. We're just now beginning to consider how and where bias manifests itself in our evaluations and in our reports. But as time goes on and the issues become more center stage and up front, it's going to be important for you to go through your mind and rack your mind before you submit your report and ask yourself, are your opinions and conclusions in any way representative of a bias? Is there any stereotype that forms the basis of your opinions and conclusions? And we as qualified medical evaluators are going to have to hash over these issues in our mind in our face-to-face evaluations and in our final product reports, such that our face-to-face evaluations and our reports, to the extent possible, to the greatest extent possible, are free of bias, are free of stereotyping. Our opinions and conclusions are free of discrimination against any person based upon their gender, their race, their national origin, their religious preference, their sexual orientation, etc. That our opinions and conclusions are accurate and are not based on any form of bias. And further, that our opinions and conclusions are not based on any bias related to any party to the action. And I know one qualified medical evaluator, at least, who I speak with regularly, who tells me that he may have been shorted $50 on his reimbursement for one QME report, but by God, he's going to get them around. He's going to get them the next time around on his very next evaluation with that same insurance company, and he's going to teach them a lesson for shorting him $50 on his billing. And so that's an example of discrimination against one or more of the parties to the action. And we all have these affiliations in our operations as qualified medical evaluators, and we have allegiances and alliances, and in the future, should this regulation pass, which I fully expect it to be, we're going to be required to admit to the parties that we have gone through each of our opinions and conclusions and reworked our opinions and conclusions so as not to be discriminatory to any party in the production of our opinions and conclusions. And in my opinion, this represents a good thing, and we're going to have a full 6-hour discussion on this in the very, very near future. So all of these changes are designed to improve QME reporting. In our next session, we're going to talk about some things that I'm very excited about related to electronic service of records, because this makes our reports much more streamlined in the submission process. In other words, getting the reports from our computer into the hands of the parties that can use the report can be greatly streamlined through the electronic service of our reports. And then we'll spend some time talking about where the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to focus its attention, and where the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to remove you as a qualified medical evaluator if you fail to comply with certain key regulations. So the denial of reappointment regulation gives us great insight as to what's important to the Division of Workers' Compensation moving forward. And remember, it's the Division of Workers' Compensation that has a responsibility to the public to administer a quality program, and they're very intent on that. I know this. I've sat with them through several committee meetings, and they're very dedicated and very committed people who honestly believe that they are trying as hard as they can to improve the system, and I believe that to be true as well. And for that reason, qualified medical evaluators who fail to participate in the improvement of the system will be removed from the system, and I'll show you where you can best comply and best be a participant in the improvement of the overall system in our very next session. So for today, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's discussion. I look forward to being with you on our next session as well. And for now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.